There is an airline out there that has won Skytrax's World's Best Cabin Crew Award 5 times in a row. 5 consecutive years. It flies out of one of the most strategically located countries on the planet, a nation of 270 million people spread across 17,000 islands. It once flew nonstop to Amsterdam, to Paris, to Rome, to Los Angeles. It was at one point genuinely considered one of the best airlines in the world. Today, roughly 40% of its fleet is sitting on the ground, not because of a pandemic, not because of a war, not because demand collapsed. The planes are grounded because the airline cannot afford to maintain them. And last year, despite receiving $1.4 billion in emergency funding from the Indonesian government, it posted a net loss of $323 million. A loss that was 4.5 times worse than the year before. That airline is Garuda Indonesia. And the story of how it got here is one of the most fascinating, infuriating, and genuinely tragic case studies in modern aviation. Because this is not a story about an airline that was bad. This is a story about a great airline that was systematically dismantled from the inside. To understand what Garuda is today, you have to understand what it once was and what it was capable of becoming. Indonesia's geography is extraordinary. 17,000 islands, the world's 4th most populous nation, a fast-growing middle class with an appetite for travel that is still, by regional standards, remarkably underserved. If you were designing a country that needed a strong national airline, you would design Indonesia. The demand is structural. It is built into the geography. You cannot drive between the islands. Garuda has been flying since 1949, the year after Indonesian independence. For decades, it operated as a flag carrier in the traditional mold, government-backed, politically connected, and gradually expanding. At its peak, in the late 80s and early 90s, it had an intercontinental network that reached Los Angeles, Cairo, Rome, Paris, Amsterdam, and Johannesburg. It was punching at a level you would not expect from a Southeast Asian carrier of that era. Then, the Asian financial crisis hit in 1997. Indonesia was one of the hardest hit economies in the region. Garuda, like much of the Indonesian economy, fell apart. Routes were cut. Fleet was reduced. And the airline spent the following decade in a kind of limbo, operating domestically, struggling financially, and largely invisible on the international stage. But in 2009, something genuinely exciting happened. Garuda launched what it called the Quantum Leap, a 5-year transformation plan. New livery, new uniforms, new fleet, new routes. The ambition was to nearly double the fleet from 62 to 116 aircraft, to grow annual passengers from 10.1 million to 27.6 million, to become a serious regional and global player. And for a while, it actually worked. By 2013, Garuda had won Skytrax's World's Best Cabin Crew Award. By 2014, it had achieved a full 5-star Skytrax rating, one of only a handful of airlines in the world to hold it. It joined SkyTeam. It was flying to Amsterdam non-stop on the Boeing 777-300ER. The Quantum Leap had, against expectations, actually leaped. The man steering it was CEO Emresha Satter. He had been in the role since 2005. And when Garuda hit that 5-star rating in 2014, Sattar stepped down, handing over what appeared to be a transformed airline. What nobody knew yet was what had been happening behind the scenes. In January 2017, Indonesia's Anti-Corruption Commission, the KPK, announced that Emresha Sattar was a suspect in a bribery investigation. The details that emerged over the following years were remarkable in their scope. Between 2005 and 2014, the entire period of the Quantum Leap, Sattar had allegedly been accepting bribes related to aircraft procurement. The investigation covered multiple procurement deals, Rolls-Royce engines, Airbus aircraft, and separately, a deal involving Bombardier CRJ-1000s and ATR-72s that would later prove catastrophic for the airline. In 2020, Sattar was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison for bribery and money laundering related to the Airbus and Rolls-Royce deals. He was found guilty of accepting the equivalent of 3.4 million US dollars in bribes, with laundering of a further amount in exchange for procurement contracts. The court found that kickbacks from Rolls-Royce and Airbus had found their way to Satar during the very period Garuda was expanding its international fleet. But that was not the end of it. In a separate case, Satar was later convicted again, this time for the Bombardier and ATR procurement scandal. Investigators found that he had unilaterally changed the seating specification in the procurement plan, increasing capacity from 70 to 90 seats without board approval, in a process that benefited suppliers who had allegedly paid for the contracts. The resulting aircraft, the CRJ-1000 and ATR-72, were simply wrong for Garuda's network. They did not fit the routes. They were not what the airline operationally needed. The financial loss to Garuda from operating those aircraft is estimated at 609 million US dollars. His sentence was ultimately doubled on appeal to 10 years. And Satar was not alone. Multiple executives were convicted. The technical director, the executive project manager for aircraft delivery, a commercial advisor who acted as a middleman between suppliers and airline leadership. It was not one rogue actor. It was a system. This matters beyond the legal dimension. Because those procurement decisions, aircraft that were wrong for the network, bought through a process that prioritized kickbacks over operational logic, left a physical legacy in Garuda's hangars. Aircraft that grounded early, maintenance costs that spiraled, fleet gaps that could not be filled. The corruption did not just cost money in bribes, it poisoned the fleet for a decade. Before I continue, here is something that surprises me every time I check my analytics. More than 90% watching this video is not subscribed. And that genuinely baffles me when I look at a story like Garuda, because this is exactly the kind of thing that does not get covered properly anywhere else. You are not going to find this level of detail on the news. Aviation channels either skip the geopolitics, skip the financials, or skip the human dimension entirely. If you want the full picture of why the global aviation industry works the way it does, the strategy, the power, the failure, this channel is where that lives. So subscribe and hit the bell, and also send this to one person who is totally into aviation. Let's get back to where we were. After Satar, Garuda entered a period that can only be described as leadership chaos. Between 2014 and today, the airline has burned through a series of CEOs at a pace that makes it nearly impossible to execute any coherent long-term strategy. One of the more extraordinary episodes came under CEO Adi Askara, who took the role in 2018. In late 2019, it emerged that a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and 2 folding bicycles had been smuggled into Indonesia aboard a Garuda cargo flight, undeclared, evading customs. Askara was fired. He was later convicted and sent to prison for smuggling. But the investigation also uncovered something far darker: allegations of sexual harassment and coercion under his leadership, with employees reportedly facing pressure and transfers as consequences. 2 consecutive CEOs, both convicted, both jailed. That is not bad luck. That is a structural governance problem. What makes this pattern so damaging for an airline is the compounding effect on institutional trust. Every time a CEO leaves under a cloud, lenders tighten. Lessors become cautious. Suppliers demand faster payment. The reputational cost of governance failure is not abstract. It shows up in the terms you get when you try to lease an aircraft or refinance a debt or negotiate a maintenance contract. Garuda has been paying that price for years. Let's talk about what the airline actually looks like operationally right now, because the numbers are striking. As of late 2025, Garuda's group-wide fleet stood at approximately 72 aircraft. Of those, only around 58 were operational. Roughly 34 aircraft were grounded, sitting in hangars, waiting for maintenance that the airline could not fund. That is nearly 40% of the fleet doing nothing while the airline continues to pay for it. The fleet itself consists primarily of Boeing 737-800 NGs, the workhorse of the domestic network. There are around 10 Airbus A, 332-200s, and 300s, handling medium-haul routes, 8 Boeing 777-300ERs for the long-haul network. And as of August 2025, a single Boeing 737 MAX 8 taken on lease, the only one in the fleet, introduced with a refreshed livery as a signal of future intent. The grounding problem is a maintenance trap. When you cannot afford to keep aircraft in service, you lose revenue. When you lose revenue, you have even less money to maintain the aircraft. The fleet sits idle, while the fixed costs, debt service, lease payments, insurance keep accumulating. Garuda's maintenance costs actually surged 23% in 2025 to $661 million. Even with a shrunken operational fleet, because deferred maintenance is always more expensive than scheduled maintenance. The knock-on effect on the network is severe. Garuda currently serves 37 domestic destinations. That sounds reasonable until you consider that Indonesia has hundreds of inhabited islands and one of the fastest growing aviation markets in Asia. Competitors like Lion Air Group have stepped aggressively into the space. Garuda has vacated, and today, Lion Air holds around 40% of domestic market share. Garuda, the flag carrier, the five-star airline, holds just 23.5%. There's a painful irony in that number. Garuda's brand, the service reputation, the Skytrax rating it still holds, is actually a premium asset in a market increasingly dominated by budget carriers. If it had the fleet to deploy that brand, it could compete on quality in a way no Indonesian low-cost carrier can match. But you cannot sell premium service on aircraft that are on the ground. In late 2025, Danantara, Indonesia's sovereign wealth fund, injected $1.4 billion into Garuda. It was the largest single capital intervention in the airline's history. And on paper, it stabilized the balance sheet enough to prevent delisting from the Jakarta Stock Exchange, which had become a genuine near-term risk. But look at where the money went, and the picture becomes complicated. Approximately 64% of the injection, around $900 million, was directed not to Garuda's own operations, but to Citylink, Garuda's low-cost subsidiary, largely to clear a 3-year fuel debt owed to state oil company Pertamina. The remaining 8.7 trillion rupiah, roughly $500 million, was earmarked for aircraft maintenance, with a target of increasing operational aircraft from 99 in 2025 to 118 by the end of 2026. The result is that the bailout, as substantial as it was, did not resolve Garuda's core problem. Net losses for 2025 came in at $323 million, 4.5 times the loss recorded the year before. Revenue declined 6% to $3.21 billion. Late payment penalties surged 700%, rising from 1.4 million to $11.1 million. That last number is a telling signal. Even with fresh capital, the airline was still missing payments to vendors, slowing down the very maintenance cycles that the money was supposed to fix. The bond market noticed. Bond yields spiked to 12.8% in November 2025, up from 8.4% in January of that year. That is a market pricing in significant default risk. And equity, while it turned marginally positive at $91.9 million, did so largely on paper. The underlying operational reality had not changed. Danantara also reduced its originally planned injection. The initial commitment had been $1.8 billion. The shortfall of around $400 million, which had been earmarked for fleet expansion, quietly disappeared from the plan. Fleet growth has been ruled out in the near term. The focus now is purely on keeping existing aircraft flying. Under current CEO Glennie Kairupan, who took the role in late 2024, Garuda has launched what it describes as a transformation plan built around 11 operational initiatives. The targets for 2026 include at least 68 serviceable Garuda aircraft, a 3-way merger of Garuda, Citylink, and Pelita Air, Indonesia's 3rd state-owned airline, and a return to profitability. There are also ambitions that stretch further out. As part of a broader trade negotiation between Indonesia and the United States in 2025, President Prabowo Subianto announced Indonesia's intention to purchase around 50 Boeing aircraft for Garuda, a deal potentially valued at $13.5 billion, framed partly as a way to reduce proposed US tariffs on Indonesian exports. As of March 2026, no specific aircraft types have been formally designated, no financing structure has been confirmed, and no delivery timeline exists. The most recent actual fleet addition remains that single Boeing 737 MAX 8 taken on lease in August 2025. Garuda has also signed a joint business agreement with Japan Airlines, launched in April 2025, which expands connectivity across the Asian network and gives Garuda a quality-focused international partner at a time when its own international network is heavily reduced. It is a smart, low-capital way to extend reach without having to deploy aircraft it does not have. The management team has also introduced some credible internal reforms, tighter controls on executive bonuses, improved cost management frameworks, a genuine shift in rhetoric away from expansion and toward operational discipline. These are real and they matter. But they are governance reforms in an organization that has historically struggled to maintain governance reforms once political winds change. Here is the structural tension that makes Garuda so hard to fix. It is a state-owned enterprise in a country where state-owned enterprises are subject to political appointment cycles. Every change of government brings the possibility of a new chairman, a new set of priorities, a new CEO. The institutional memory that would allow a genuine multi-year turnaround to take root gets disrupted every time that cycle turns. The quantum leap worked for a while because it had political backing and a clear mandate. What followed it was 9 years of that mandate being slowly dismantled. And yet, and this is the part that makes Garuda such a genuinely compelling case, the underlying asset is not broken. The brand still has equity. The Skytrax 5-star rating, maintained since 2014, is a remarkable achievement for an airline in this financial condition. The in-house maintenance division, GMF Aero Asia, demonstrated during the 2025 to 2026 holiday peak that it could support nearly 97 aircraft per day when given the resources to do so. The capability exists. The workforce knows how to operate a premium airline. What the organization has never been able to consistently do is protect that capability from the people running it. Garuda Indonesia is worth watching in 2026 for one specific reason. The three-way merger with Citylink and Pelita Air, if it completes in the first half of the year as planned, would consolidate Indonesia's state aviation assets into a single group with significantly more scale, a cleaner cost structure, and potentially the balance sheet discipline that none of the three carriers have been able to achieve alone. That merger is not guaranteed. It has faced delays. But if it happens, and if Kairapan's operational reforms hold, the arithmetic of the recovery starts to look plausible. If it does not, if the pattern repeats, if governance slips again, if political pressure overrides operational logic, then Garuda will have had its last serious chance at a sustainable future. And the country's aviation market will continue to be defined by Lion Air and the low-cost carriers that have filled the space the flag carrier was supposed to occupy. The tragedy of Garuda is not that it is a bad airline. It is that it is, in many ways, a genuinely good one, with a service culture, the geographic position, and the market need to be something great. The question has never been whether Garuda could compete. The question has always been whether the system around it would allow it to. So far, the answer has been no. The next 12 months will tell us whether that is finally about to change. If this video gave you a sharper picture of what is really happening inside one of aviation's most fascinating and frustrating stories, then hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about this stuff. Subscribe if you are not already, and leave a comment below. Do you think Garuda can actually turn this around, or is the system simply too broken to fix? I read every single one, and on a topic like this, I really want to know what you think. Thank you for watching, and I see you in the next video.